Good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody. Can I ask if you all can make an attempt to sit down? May I express a huge welcome to everybody today, especially if you're the first-time attenders. This is an excellent opportunity for us to come together to actually share many of our experiences throughout the year. I introduce myself as Mark Law. I'm the chair. It's my first year as chair, so it's my first convention as chair. But obviously, I think I've attended every convention of Locality, so I'm kind of a familiar face. And for those of you who are regular attenders, please keep an eye out for those who look slightly lost, not engaged. Please spend time to talk to each other. We have a kind of a unique opportunity to spend time together networking. Our stories and experiences and relax and influence. Your voice counts. I would say this is a real experience for you to spend time reflecting and learning, but also sharing your learning with others. One of my most important tasks is to go through some basic housekeeping. And for those who actually stayed in the hotel last night, you may find one of these messages quite ironic. There's no planned fire test or alarms whilst in the Should, in the event of alarm sound, please consider it as a genuine alarm and please make your way up to the entrance above us on the stairway. If the fire drill rings, all delegates should go out the main lobby and assemble outside the building. That's my influential bit. So, as we know, we live in challenging times, and even last night's elections point towards a very uncertain political environment which we all have to operate. But obviously, I need to express the point that we come together today to actually look at what that actually means in our community. Every week, over 4,000 people walk through our doors. Ultimately, lives are transformed, and that's the power of community. We need to believe in the power community in many respects and actually come together to drive and try to achieve a fairer society. Our impact is important. To this end, I'd like to introduce Tony Armstrong, CEO of Locality, who will take us forward in the morning. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark, and great to be here. How's everyone feeling? Oh, come on, you can do better than that. How's everyone feeling? Yes. I always think of this, as some of you know, it's like a family wedding that happens every year. So it's always good to be with you all. It's always part kind of celebration, part restoring batteries, part getting inspiration from each other, commiserating with each other, and sharing learning. Because we know how difficult it is out there when you're kind of battling against lots of headwinds to try and do the best for local communities. So please do make sure you get the most out of these couple of days, because lots of people say at the end, it's given them a kind of new lease of life and reminded everybody why we're all here. So there's over 500 people going to be here over the next 2 days, and we want you to get the most out of it. Good, clap to that. Oh, it's very American. I've got you all revved up now. If you can do that at everything I say, that would be really good. So it's there's lots of people here, and we want you to get the most out of it. And I'll be giving you a few tips on how to get most of it in a second. We've got a great program lined up over the next couple of days. This morning, we're going to hear from Marvin Rees, the Mayor of Bristol, who's joined us. And also, we will be joined, we are promised, by the Secretary of State for Communities, who you may have guessed is not yet here. So just to add a little bit of jeopardy and tension to the proceedings, I don't know whether he's going to be here or not by the time that he's supposed to be speaking. So let's all cross our fingers. So while we have those speakers, and we've also got two of our excellent members who are going to talk about their experiences as well this morning, we'll then have a Q&A session at the end of the plenary. Unfortunately, the Secretary of State won't be able to stay for that. So we'll have more questions for us. If you'd like to make your questions for the Secretary of State, I'm sure you can ask them in a different way, because we thought he was going to be staying for questions. So what we're going to do also is give you the opportunity to feed your questions in a very high-tech way, which I will describe how to do in a second. So while the speakers are doing their bit, if you've got questions that occur to you, you can log them, and then we'll feed them back into the Q&A session later. So before I give you some of those high-tech tips, which you can all look forward to, I just thought I'd talk about some of the things that we've been doing. So as most of you will know, we believe in the power of community. We all believe in the power of community in this room, I'm sure. Yay! There's a little bit of a desperate cheer there. Yeah, got it. We all believe in the power of community. Yes. Because of that, one of the things that we're trying to do is to work with local authorities, local councils, to turn the tide on large-scale outsourcing. It's a campaign many of you will know that we've been working on for a number of years with the aim of keeping it local, keeping our services local and meaningful. Why? Because we know that local services are more responsive. Services can transform lives when they're kept locally, designed and delivered by local people. We know that we can reduce long-term pressure on the public sector by focusing on early intervention and prevention rather than constantly having to deal with crisis interventions. We know that we want to save money and actually stop wasting money on large-scale outsourcing contracts which deliver pretty crap services and are more costly. So that's why we're doing all of this work around Keep It Local. We're really delighted to be doing a project at the moment with Lloyds Bank Foundation in England and Wales, and we're working in particular with two areas. One of them is Bradford and the other one is Bristol, which is great that we're here. So we're working with both Bradford and Bristol to help them keep it local, to make sure that we're putting these principles into practice through commissioning, procurement, policy, practice, that kind of thing. So we're delighted in particular that Marvin's here and is going to be talking about what Bristol is doing, which is really great, and Marvin is a great champion for this kind of agenda. Next year, we're also going to be launching a wider Keep It Local campaign to encourage more councils around the country. So it's not just going to be confined to Bradford and Bristol. We want to expand and create a whole movement of local authorities who know that there's a different way of doing things to keep it local, and we want to be able to support them. So the other thing that we've been really focusing on is our Save Our Spaces campaign. So you might have seen we got a lot of media attention over the summer when we launched our campaign focusing on protecting public spaces and trying to highlight the large number of spaces that were being sold off by local authorities to the private sector. It found that over 4,000 publicly owned spaces were being sold off every year across England with very little information on how they were being sold and who they were being sold to. So we want to kind of keep up the pressure on that because we want to see more funding and support to enable more community ownership. We know how important community-owned assets, buildings and land is across our locality network. We know how important it is in terms of running services, building a sustainable business model, but also about making sure you have a real powerful stake in the local economy. So we want government to kickstart a community ownership fund, and maybe James Brokenshire will say something about that. We don't know. James, it's great that he's speaking here. He'll be the first Secretary of State that we've had speaking at a locality conference since Locality was formed in 2011 from our predecessor organisations. And it's really good. We've got some very good signs from him that he wants to develop a proactive approach around supporting the community sector more. We'll hopefully hear what some of that means when he speaks, if he arrives in time. And then obviously the other thing that we're particularly focused on at the moment is the B word, Brexit. Obviously no one quite knows what that will look like, when it will happen and everything else, so it's a bit difficult, like nailing jelly to a wall. But what we know from our members and the work that we've done in talking to people are some of the concerns that people have around things that need to be addressed, whatever happens in terms of the settlement. So one of the most important things is what happens to EU funding. Many of our members are very reliant on it. The government has announced there's going to be a UK Shared Prosperity Fund, which is going to be, in effect, the UK replacement to some of those EU funding. And there's going to be a consultation apparently coming out later in the year. We want to do a lot of lobbying. We're kind of ramping up our activity to make sure whatever happens in terms of UK funding, it is accessible to community organisations and it is targeted on deprivation. It can't just be cycled on kind of big infrastructure projects that don't impact on the most deprived areas in the country. So that's our key lobbying goal. So hopefully maybe we'll hear something from James on that too. So that's a bit of an update on some of the kind of big pressures, big issues that we've been representing your views about. So, tips for how to get the most out of this convention. So, first of all, few bits of kind of administration. So, key things, you might just want to look at these things. If you have any question, everything should be on the back of your badge in terms of where you need to be. So check out the back of your badge now. It should tell you what workshops you're going and where to go. The key thing is that you may have questions. Our staff are wearing this year, modelling very fashionable purple outfits, so you can spot them all along the side there. So if you haven't spoken to any of our members of staff, take the opportunity. They are all wearing fetching purple at the moment. And if you've got any other questions and you can't find anybody, then just go to the reception desk and people will be able to help you. For those of you on social media, we encourage you to be part of the social media and the debate. So if you could use the hashtag Locality18, that would be really good. So we'll be able to find you and you'll be able to join in the conversation. Hopefully we'll also get some really good profile from the conference. There's also a photo competition that we're going to be doing. Woo! Yeah, just checking you are still awake. We would like you to share your photographs on convention. Any photographs of people chatting, in discussion, laughing, doing whatever they're doing at the convention. But we'll have a competition for the best picture. So if you can tweet them using the hashtag Locality18, then you'll have been deemed to have already entered the competition. We'll announce the winner at the end, and the best photo will win a ticket to next year's convention. Yeah, that's quite the prize. So I hope you're all incentivized by that. Yeah, our budget couldn't stretch to anything slightly more glamorous than that. So also make the most of the breaks. We've got lots of great exhibitors here, and so go and talk to them. Network with everybody, obviously. We've got our staff in the back section here offering free one-to-one expert advice with some of our exhibitors also. If you need any help with a particular problem that you've got or need some consultancy support, then talk to one of our members of staff who can provide that. And if you're not a member, then also we can talk to you. We have a special room where you can go and talk to our Catherine about the benefits of membership. And then we couldn't put on this convention without the really kind, generous support of our sponsors. So I'd like to thank, in particular, Power to Change, our great friends who are sponsoring this for the 4th year in a row, and NatWest as our main convention sponsors. But thank you to all of our exhibitors and conferences. Now, for those who've been here before, how many of you have been here before? Put your hands up. Yeah, quite a lot of you. So I think there's roughly about a half and half split, which is quite handy for what I'm about to do. So for those of you who've been here before, you know I always like to make you feel uncomfortable during this plenary session and make you actually do something. So that time has now arrived. So we really want to get the most out of your experience of this convention, in particular in networking. So it's a great opportunity to meet up with new people as well as catch up with old friends. But some people struggle with networking. It can be a bit daunting for people. So I'm going to give you a few tips. So if you do find networking difficult, I want, first of all, us all to make a kind of solemn pledge that we will be open and welcoming to everybody, that we will keep an eye out for people who may be standing on their own, don't know if they're talking to anybody, so that we'll approach them and say hello. Do we all agree with that pledge? Excellent. I can get you all to agree to lots of things. The second thing, a little technique. If you want to, if you feel like you would like to network with people, but they feel a bit uncomfortable breaking into a group conversation, don't know quite how to do it, here's a tip for those who really want to do it. You can enter a room doing this. Mingle, mingle, mingle. And then see if anybody responds to that. So do you all want to stand up and have a go at doing this? Stand up. Everybody stand up. Come on, I said I'd get you to do something annoying. Okay, so picture the scene. You're walking into a room, you think, I really want to talk to that person over there. How do I do it? What do? Mingle, mingle, mingle. Okay, good. I guarantee you that everybody in the room will want to talk to you. Now, as you all also, if you can stay standing up, I just want you to have a look round. So if those of you who have been to the convention before could put your hands up again. Okay, if you've got your hand up, try and look around you to see who hasn't got their hand up, and vice versa. Check out somebody, have a look at somebody you think you don't know, but maybe you will get to know. Somebody with a hand up if you've got a hand down, and vice versa. Don't be too sinister about that, but do have a look. Now, I want you to approach that person to try and make eye contact with the person you've got your eye on. Again, not being sinister. And I would like you to shake their hands, give them a fist bump, high five, say hello. Okay. It's a beautiful sight to see you networking. Okay. Right, you're done with the networking. Stop with the networking. Everybody, come back to me. Come back, come back, come back. Everybody! Right. I think that worked maybe too well. Because what I'd like you to do now, with your new friends, you have these cards of different colors in your packs. You have one each in your pack, so on your chair. If you could pick up these with your new friends, and I'm going to regret doing this because you're all going to be talking loudly again for the next 5 minutes, I'd like you to take a selfie with the two of you, you and your new friends, holding these leaflets. So take a selfie on your phone. If you haven't got a phone, ask somebody else to take a picture of you, and then we want you to start tweeting them before. So chaos will now ensue, but take a selfie with your poster. Right then, if we can try and settle back into some kind of managed, disciplined order. I mean, no one ever listens to me when I do this thing. Right then, everybody, if you can take your seats. Thank you for taking part in that enthusiastically. So remember our 3-step guide to networking. So number 1, what are we all going to do? Well, number 1, we're going to be pledged to be open. Spot people who don't know what they're doing and go and talk to them. Number 2, mingle, mingle, mingle. And I want to see you doing that and saying it loud and proud. And then number 3, you've got your new buddy. So whenever you see your buddy, I want you to high-five them, fist bump them, hug them, do something to them, not in a sinister way, and just say hello and check in with them because you've already got a friend. So hopefully now you'll get a really good experience out of this. So the program itself is great. The energizers are great. I definitely encourage you to take part in the full program. We've got our first ever Locality Awards ceremony later on with food and drinks later on in here. So you don't need to go out for dinner. There are free drinks, free food in here, as well as being able to celebrate the achievements across the Locality network. There's also a fantastic energizer tomorrow morning at 10, where we will be learning how to do sign language. It's a really great early morning energizer, which I'm looking forward to. And I want to now start to introduce our speakers, because the first session is we're going to hear from some fantastic lineup of speakers. We're going to have a Q&A session at the end of this. So there is now a little bit of technical detail for you to do. So what we want to do, we're going to put a slide up of how you can submit your questions while the speakers are speaking. So we're using this program called Slido, which some of you might be familiar to do. So what you need to do, it's very simple. You just need to get your phone out and just put in the web address sli.do, and then you go up to a very simple screen. You just type in the event code locality18. So you can do that during this next hour or so. And there's a very easy way in the site that you will get to, it says just ask a question. You'll be able to just submit your questions there as the speakers are speaking, so you won't have to remember them for the full hour. What we will do then is collate those questions as they come in and make sure that we're capturing. We won't promise to be able to ask every single question that you ask. Obviously, I'll do a bit of moderation and try and theming some of the questions as possible. So if it's a specific question for a specific person, then just highlight that in the question. And all of you will be able to see what other people are asking, and you'll be able to vote on if you agree that a question is a really good one, then you can vote for it to be a higher priority, okay? So that's all made sense? If you're having any problem or you don't have a smartphone, then do ask one of our members of staff down the side. So, fingers on buttons, think about all the questions that you want to ask. But first of all, delighted to get on with this and invite our first speaker, and that is Marvin Rees, the Mayor of Bristol. Marvin is a Yale World Fellow, graduate of Operation Black Vote, is a former BBC journalist, public health worker, voluntary sector manager, and co-founder of the City Leadership Programme. When he was elected Mayor of Bristol in May 2016, he became the first ever, and I can't believe this is true, but it is, apparently the first ever Mayor of Black African Caribbean descent of a European city. So Marvin has pledged to make Bristol a fairer city for all, and that's music to all of our ears. So delighted that he's here. Welcome, Marvin.
Thanks, Steve. So you'll be pleased to know I put my stopwatch on, so don't go over time. So welcome to Bristol. It's fantastic to have so many of you here, and for those, there's probably quite a few people in the room who I have worked with in the past. You know, so it really does sit in the heart of my sense of how a place should be run, to making sure that we genuinely respect and support and enable to flourish the power of our communities. Today, I thought I'd start with a little bit of a story and then talk about how we're trying to approach Bristol, and then talk a little bit about the implications I think it has for political leadership, both the challenge to politicians and to the electorate. Well, I'll start with a story because it really captures so much of some of the challenges for me. So one of my councillors invited me out to their community, it's not their community, the community they represent. This was a little while ago. And we sat around a table, and there were probably about 10 or 12 people sat around the table. And then the councillor started to list to me all the problems in that community. Families were breaking down. Children are underperforming at school. Transport system is appalling. So, you know, it was a list of 10 negative things. Essentially, people don't know how to tie their shoelaces up here, and I need to turn up and fix it from City Hall. And, you know, I worked in public health. My colleague Mohammed is in the hallway. And in public health, we didn't go out and talk to people like that. not a medical background of public health, but a community development, a political understanding of health inequalities. We needed to go out and talk to people about what was in their power, what was in their assets, how did they get engaged, because power and influence was one of the pathways to improve population health, engagement, the ability to make sure that services wrapped around a community. And I used to work for a development agency. My first master's was around Black American politics. So my sense of actually, how do you get power, even in the face of institutions that don't offer it or don't readily deliver it, is key to my understanding of what we're actually trying to get done. So in that table, I said, all right, I want to respect the fact that there are lots of challenges, and as an authority, there are many shortfalls in the way that the councils worked and the cities worked. We recognize that. But can we spend a little bit of time talking about what you have got and what assets you may have in the community at the moment? And as we went around the table, it felt to me like people were being released, because I don't think necessarily people, they recognize the challenges, but there were things. So someone actually ran the community center. They had a building. It was in a good state. He was putting in long hours. He wanted people to come and engage with him on running that. There was a church just taking on 2 workers, one a development worker. They were looking for opportunities to connect with the community. There were residents. There was one who was organizing street parties. There was another resident who was organizing people to go and visit isolated older people in the community. There was a community center, a community hub just down the road that had always struggled to connect with that particular community. And they said, actually, we've got this building, we've got resource, but we don't know how to make the connection. We struggle for some reason. How can we do that? I mean, over the course of the next hour, the whole tone of that conversation changed. And what you get me right here is sometimes there's a misinterpretation. What we were not doing is saying, job done, no one's holding me accountable anymore. But what we did do was end up with a conversation in which people in that community were saying, okay, well, let's organize another meeting and talk about how we make the connection between what you're doing on your street parties and my desire to have street parties here, between the fact I know there are people who want to visit older people and they're over here, between we know we have this community development worker who can come in and bring some capacity. The whole tone of that conversation changed. But so many alarm bells kicked off for me, because actually, I mean, I've been elected for 2.5 years now, but I haven't been elected my whole life. And coming from a community development background, I still want those principles to be true. And it cannot be that relationship is, look, these people don't even know how to tie up their shoelaces. The conversation has to be one about what's the power, what are the assets, what can we mobilize, and then how do we make sure that the way public institutions function actually enables that, supports that. It's a real what I had a conversation with someone yesterday, a real empowerment model. Now, the way we've approached Bristol, the leadership of Bristol, since I've got elected, is around this phrase, one city approach. And Paul Hassan from Locality and many other things has been key to that. When I talked to Steve Bullock, the mayor of Lewisham, one of the things he said to me was, this was when I was a candidate back in 2012 in the election I lost. He said that when he was first elected, he walked into his office and there was a whole range of levers, but when he pulled on them, they weren't connected to anything. That's the nature of political leadership. That there's so many factors going into shaping a place over which you do not have command and control power, and probably actually neither should you, right? That would be a very dangerous structure. So we've tried to set up a structure whereby we said, how can we pull the whole city together around a smaller number of shared priorities that we can all begin to focus on, and ultimately hold each other accountable to delivering against those overarching shared priorities. And at the heart of that also comes a culture that we've tried to bring in, which is called make us a big offer and then make a big ask. It was a phrase that kind of just slipped out easy in the first instance, but it's actually become really central to what we do. So in that relationship with the political leadership and other institutions as well, and in fact, I used to say this when we were running the public mental health team in the NHS, rather than just saying, okay, this is what I want, come and share that big vision for Bristol. Tell us what you need to get done, and then tell us those things that you need to be able to deliver that. And I would say, actually, between Fair Share and Feed Bristol, over nearly 13,000 meals were delivered to children this summer through the Feed Bristol campaign as part of our commitment to make sure no child is left hungry. And that came from that very kind of conversation. A man called Andy Street come and said, you know what, this is my offer to Bristol. Right? No child goes hungry. But this is what I need from the city to enable me to deliver that. I need this from the council, I need this from the health service, I need this from schools. Then we know what the deal is, then we're broker. And actually we're relating to each other as equals because we're having a deal, we're having a negotiation. And it's a solutions-focused and empowerment approach to city leadership. In fact, what was really nice is one of the highlights of my year last year, when Points West covered that story, I was interviewed for it, but I was only about 15 seconds in the interview. It was a city commitment to make sure no child goes hungry, but the people who got the high profile were the people running the program with our support and with our partnership. And that's what we want to try and do, unleash that vision and that potential in the city. Now, as well as Andy, there were a whole bunch of people who really have come forward to kind of capture that approach. You know, as you heard just now, we are part of the Keep It Local initiative because we absolutely believe in that sense of how do you get the city to develop? And we were talking about this yesterday. We just appointed our new Director of Public Health. How do we unlock that challenge of the way the city develops is in a way that actually produces health, produces resilient communities, empowered communities that don't, in the name of social justice, end up needing public services, and in the name of our financial viability, needing to depend on public spending. Because actually, it's surely the justice route to make sure that that happens. And as we look at what we do with our assets and how we can begin to, in the right time, in the right way, in partnership with communities, hand them over so that they can be resources and bases of power, that's the thing that we're trying to unlock as a key part of that. How do we look at that network of community assets? But I tell you, there is a debate around this that locality would be very helpful. Someone came in, we were I won't say which area because it light too many fires, but I had a conversation just last night about community assets and how we could look at taking some of our assets and having the community come over and start to take them over, to shape them to what they actually need to be for a place. Not abdicating responsibility, not shifting stuff over because we don't want to do it, not because we believe in small states. But what is that nature we want, what is that relationship we want to get to in 5, 10 years? And how do we want the balance of ownership of stuff, resources, spaces to be? What's the nature of that relationship between governance institutions and communities? And the statement came back to me is, we want it publicly funded with council staff, and that's just what we want. And I'm saying, but we need to have a conversation. If it's inappropriate right now for us to look at an asset, then we're not going down that road. But let's have a conversation around what that future journey should be. And actually, just after I was elected, I wrote for Vosca's magazine Thrive, and I asked this question. Let's have that conversation around what we want that relationship with the community sector to be now, and have that picture of what it needs to be in 15 years' time. What size does it need to be? How will it represent the full diversity of the place? What service areas or what development areas will it be engaged in? But what I was keen to point out is this is not a community sector of the gaps. It's not saying, where is the public sector not going to be, and let's stuff the community sector in there to pick up the slack. This is about recognizing the fact that a thriving community sector is both a driver and evidence of community resilience and community power. So how can we put that picture out there and begin looking at the way we commission, the way we distribute our assets and our resources, the way we give people public platforms to begin to work towards that longer-term vision? I mean, we have people in the city, and my list is too long to mention, but people like Alex Kitto at the Southmead Development Trust, right at the heart of the regeneration of Southmead and Glencoyne Square, really picking it up, mobilizing the community, having people in the community taste that sense of power and impact. Mark Pepper, Ambition, Lawrence Weston. There we go. You probably knew he was going to get a mention. Delivering 40 energy-efficient homes. And again, people in that community, and I used to live in Lawrence Weston, it's on the edge of the city. I felt like I was nowhere. But people in that community seeing the evidence of their ability to make change. And it's not a perfect world. The political systems don't respond every time, but they can respond if it's done in the right way with the right support. Caroline Hassan, Noah West Media Centre, and We Can Make. We had the Bristol Housing Festival here just last week, talking about how we do digital inclusion and how we bring housing forward for people in a way that is most appropriate. And actually, units going up in Norwell West now, community-led, totally in line with what the community priorities are. So there's some amazing things happening in Bristol, and I really look to those people, and I often hold them up as examples of the energy that's out there, the expertise that's out there, and the kind of people we need to empower and to release. If I can just say two quite personal reflections off the back of that about what I think this means for politics, and it feeds into what it means for politicians, but to be frank, it also feeds into what it means for the electorate and how the electorate talk about politics. One is, going back to that first story, and I had this conversation last night, politics has to move beyond transaction. I was I've got to think about how we do my leaflet, because I don't want to end up in a conversation that no one's engaged in. But what I don't want to do is say, here are 5 things I'm going to do for you, give them to you, and purchase your vote. Transactional. It can't be like that anymore. The relationship has to be, look, these are my priorities, and these are the areas in which I want you to partner with me to deliver. Because anything else is distant, transactional, you may get it, you may not. How we've fallen into that kind of politics, I do not know. But to me, it's a real impoverished idea of politics. But on the flip side of that, the electorate, but on the flip side of that, we need an electorate, and to be frank, we need a journalism that can cope with the fact that we're saying, do you know what? We're going to put some ambitions on the table. We might not make them, but we've so focused on the right priorities, and we're offering you partnership to deliver the right things. But they have to be aspirational. And someone said to me a while ago, he's concerned that the price that people pay for getting involved in public life is so high now that people won't do it. Politicians won't take risks. And the conversations I have is, yeah, but what are you going to do? What are you going to do for people? One of my discussions constantly is, well, I'm not coming around to cook you dinner and tie your shoelaces. What we are doing is trying to create an environment and making sure that we have all the support systems in place to enable you to get done what you want to get done. But I say that's a two-way development. It's about that we need to talk about our communities different, but the electorate needs to be different. And I'll tell you, you judge the politicians when they do it. Judge the campaigns. The number of times I've seen local campaigns based on, I'm going to find one thing in your community. Doesn't matter if it's 20 years old. I'm going to find this building, and I'm going to build my whole campaign on protecting this building. Even if it was developed 25 years, it is no longer fit for purpose. All right? You've got to make judgments about those kind of campaigns. Work out whether it's a negative campaign on just saving things, or whether it's a positive campaign saying, where do we want to be in 5, 10, 15 years? A development approach, a leadership approach, one that challenges the electorate, as well as just trying to feed the electorate, okay? But I welcome your pushback and your thoughts on all that, because I'm an imperfect person in an imperfect political system trying to make change, and probably not going to make all of it that we want to make, but we do our best. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Marvin, for that speech. So remember to get your questions in on Slido. If you haven't already put them in, you'll see if you've gone on to it that the current favourite question is my mingle mingle dance as good as Theresa May's? So knock that off the top. Get a decent question for Marvin. Thank you, John, for that. And it was much better than Theresa May's anyway. I was going to do the whole coming on to Dancing Queen, but it's a bit old hat. So moving on to our next speakers, we're always delighted to be able to showcase the work of our member organisations, and we've got 2 fantastic speakers who are going to share their experiences for you. So I'd like to welcome up Amy Kinnear and Suzanne Wilson. Amy is the CEO of Hartcliffe and Withywood Community Partnership, and Amy is passionate about empowering local residents and creating a fairer society. And Suzanne is Chief Executive of Lockleaze Neighbourhood Trust. And Suzanne has worked in national government, higher education policy and local government, and now runs a community centre in North Bristol where she says she can finally make a difference. Over to you guys.
Thanks. Morning, everyone. I'm Amy Kinnear from Hartcliffe and Withywood Community Partnership.
And I'm Suzanne from Lockleaze Neighbourhood Trust. And when Locality said, could we come and open their conference for you today, we both separately said, are you sure you mean us? And not, someone bigger and better and who's been doing it for longer than us. And Marvin name-checked some of those, and you'll get to see some of those over the next couple of days. But no, they said they did want us, and Amy and I both started this job in separate organisations about 2 years ago, so we're first-timers here. And we just thought, there's loads of experience in the room, so we would just share some stories and some of our reflections and our kind of two big questions that we both agreed on. But before we do that, we'll just tell you a bit about the organisations we work for and the communities we're in.
So Hartcliffe and Withywood is a housing estate on the southern edge of Bristol. In the 1970s, it was home to Europe's largest cigarette manufacturing plant. That was the major employer in the area and churned out an unbelievable 350 million cigarettes a week. By the 90s, the factory had closed and the estate entered into economic decline. Since then, there's been a huge amount of capital in infrastructure investment in the area. We've had new roads, we've had new school buildings, we've had new retail parks, and also the area is, we've got some of the loveliest biodiverse green spaces in Bristol, and a fantastic community. However, if you come from Hartcliffe and Withywood, your life chances are still very far from equal. In fact, they're lower than anywhere in Bristol and pretty much anywhere else in England on most indicators. So we're a community organisation. We're based in the heart of the estate. We run a really big busy community centre, and in an area with limited transport links, we also run a community transport service, which runs about 40,000 passenger journeys a year at the moment. I talked a moment about the kind of legacy of capital investment in a community, and there's no doubt that it has benefited people there, but it's also maybe perhaps left a bit of a legacy of quite top-down engagement and decision-making, and we're really interested as an organisation in addressing that. We've been doing a lot of work, going out door knocking, finding people with their passions and interests to share, putting them in touch with each other. We're working with local on community-led local strategies, brokering conversations between the community and local institutions, and celebrating what's great in the area with festivals and events and so on.
So Lockleaze, it's in the north of the city, and it's just a giant cul-de-sac, really. So you only go there if you live there. It was designed and built just straight after the Second World War in that great social reform movement, homes for heroes from the war, large family, 3-bed, semi-detached, big, wide roads, housing greens, no industry at all, just a garden suburb. And the wisdom of that has later been revisited, no local employment and the low density and low spending power, meaning that it's difficult to maintain those kind of commercial services, shops and cafes and businesses, and transport, which means it's difficult to get to employment. And that means also that community has been a really strong part of what's happened in Lockleaze right from day one. And the organisation that I work for, Lockleaze Neighbourhood Trust, they've been around for 21 years. We're resident-led, mostly residents on our board, in our staff, with our volunteers, and we do the usual run of bingo and arts and crafts, and we've got 2 community buildings that happens in. We do a lunch club for children on free school meals in the summer holiday, and I guess 2 big projects that we're working on, and one is about stories and identity, and sometimes people will say about Lockleaze, it's the forgotten estate. It's the place that the council sends people it wants to forget about. And that is probably true of lots of the outer-lying estates of Bristol, that narrative. And we really want to challenge that and tell some stories about diversity and strength. And the other project is community-led housing, which I'll be telling you more about in a minute. So when I arrived at Lockleaze Neighbourhood Trust, fresh from local government, I was told the really good news that we had 6 months' worth of money for my salary. So that was great. And, although we'd been around for 21 years, we were actually quite like a startup. We'd lost some local authority funding had been withdrawn, which was about 30% of our income. So we needed to increase our trading, and we needed to have a better offer for the community. And it was kind of terrifying and exciting in equal measure. But I remember this day when, not long after I'd started, I phoned up my chair and I had this idea and wanted to take it forward. I said, shall I write a board paper then about that? And she said, Suzanne, I think that's just something you can get on and do. I was like, oh, amazing. And just, I mean, if you've ever worked in any government organisation, the kind of freedom of minimal bureaucracy and maximum opportunity to have ideas and make stuff happen, that I knew this was the job for me.
So we just talked about our top 2 questions 2 years into the job. And so the first one was about how we build local economic vitality from the bottom up. And I just wanted to share one little story about what we're doing in Hartcliffe. The Science District Centre is in the middle of the estate. In the 1960s, it was one of Bristol's most thriving shopping districts. By the 90s, you can see that every single shop was boarded up, and the site was subsequently redeveloped into a Morrison supermarket. People really wanted the Morrison supermarket, and they love it. But as you know, supermarkets sell everything, and it doesn't leave a lot of space for local economic activity alongside it. People say, we love the Morrisons, but we didn't know we'd never have a fish and chip shop again, or wouldn't have anywhere to go on a date again. And also, things are quite hard for Morrisons now, since the youth club's shut, and all the local young people hang out in the foyer every afternoon and evening, putting all the shoppers off. So we've been working with Morrisons and with partners and with the community to look at how we can make the whole site work for everybody. We've been sending youth outreach workers onto the street. We've been setting up a new community-owned and led football club, and we've been looking at how we can reopen the youth centre. We've also been working with the community to reclaim some of the space in the car park and set up local community markets. And it's going really well. This is Avril and friends selling the best goat curry in Bristol. Avril sells her goat curry for £1.50. We sell cups of tea for 20p because it's an area of really low spending power, and that's what people can afford. And so we need to recognise that this is going to take a long time to be viable businesses for people doing stalls, but also bring in any income for our organisation. But we're really committed to helping this grow at the right pace so it survives.
Our next question was, what does good community engagement look like? And when I joined, I'd mentioned this kind of looming hole in our finances, and there's this real temptation to just fundraise to try and fill that space. But we made the decision that we were going to focus on having a really authentic resident voice and understanding residents' views first. So quite bravely held off the fundraising and trained up residents as community researchers, door-knocked, begged, badgered, and got nearly 700 responses to our community survey. And we held workshops, and we turned some of those issues and ideas into actions and plans. And the number one issue that came up was housing. As you might expect, all of the issues around housing, high rents, overcrowding, insecure private tenancies. And in Lockleaze, there's a real opportunity around housing at the minute. There are over 30 development sites owned by the council, and they have plans to build over 1,000 homes in the area. And they also have a local authority that's interested in working with community on that. So we as a community could build, own, design, based on community needs, 10 or 100 of those homes. So we got a group of people together, and we got an architect, and we told them what we liked and what we didn't like, and then we shared some designs, and we came up with a plan. And we've got some money from Power to Change, thank you, wherever you are. And so we're working on that route now to planning and our first community-led homes. And there's a real tension between that big, wide, nearly 700 views, and that kind of small, focused, narrow group of 10 people, some of whom don't always turn up and are a bit more peripheral than others. And so one of the things that I spend a lot of time thinking about, and I'd love to talk to other people about, is how you manage that wide but quite surface engagement with the sort of narrow, deep view. Basically, how many people do you need to be community-led?
And we were talking about the kind of community engagement that's happened over the last couple of years in our communities. And one of the things that we were remarking on is how most of the conversations that happen are led by institutions, whether it's the council or academics or the press, who come to us saying, we've got a really important thing, it's something we'd like to do that's really great, or this report we'd like to write, and your voice is really important. But the agenda always comes from them, and we're interested in a little bit about how we can just clear the agenda and step back and have conversations on an equal footing. And I just wanted to share like one little story, recent story, from Hartcliffe. This is Kerry. She's one of the HWCP volunteers and a local resident in Hartcliffe. And she went to a city debate event recently, and the merchant venturers were there, and they're a very well-known Bristol institution for those that are not from Bristol. And Kerry very, very bravely stood up in front of everybody, and she said, well, can I be a merchant venturer? I'm a single mum, I work 3 different part-time jobs, and I'm very well connected in my community. And as you can imagine, she was told, no, you're not connected with the right people and you're not successful enough in your business. And Kerry said, well, okay, but what about you just come and just meet us? So we're working with the Merchant Ventures and Kerry in the next few weeks to just get some people from that organisation and members of the community together and just sit and listen to each other without a set agenda. As Kerry says, just hear about the good bits and the bad bits. We all know that listening is just really, really important, isn't it? That when people listen, it's a really important start of change for individuals and for communities and for institutions. And we're interested in what we can do to make that happen.
So we really love this job, and we fundamentally believe that community is the right level to solve loads of things about how we feel and well-being and health and some of these bigger issues that we've talked about as well. But it is a really hard job, and there are times when we have thought, what have we done, taking it on? And there are a few people and organisations that without which we would not still be here, both of us, and particularly, you know, Quartet Community Foundation and Locality, who's championed the work that we do, and also other chief execs in the city doing similar jobs to us that we've just been able to phone up and say, and each other, you know, this has happened, what do I do about this? Yeah, and we wouldn't be there without that amazing support.
Yeah, definitely. So hopefully we've just shared a few examples with you today about how in areas where there's limited employment opportunities, organisations like ours and like the others in the room can help build local economic vitality, and in how communities where the housing system or the transport system is just not working for people, community organisations can really come in and offer locally owned and led solutions. And in areas that are often defined by others or defined by their problems, we can help celebrate what's great and really get those local stories out. That's it.
Thank you so much, Amy and Suzanne. That was brilliant and really encapsulated at the end that whole concept of the power of community. You know, that concept of the community is the right kind of unit which people are already tweeting about. If you're following the hashtag, where problems can be solved of some of the things that we are facing at a national and global perspective. Brilliant, well done. So now we have delight in welcoming James Brokenshire, the Secretary of State for... and as the Secretary of State said also that he's coming along to the Communities Partnership Board in a couple of weeks. So the Communities Partnership Board is the Ministry's way of communicating and liaising on policy development with our sector. So I sit on that board. I'm actually the co-chair from the sector, and he's coming along to that to talk to a group of national organisations like ourselves, membership organisations, about what more he can do and what more the department can do to push this agenda. So it's the first time that a Secretary of State has again come to that meeting, so there are some really positive signals. Our job, of course, will be to push him as hard as possible to go faster and to do more on this. And it's interesting, some of the questions that you've already started raising on this, we will definitely be raising with him. So, now it's our time for our Q&A discussion. So can I invite Marvin, Amy and Suzanne back up to the stage, sit in our comfy area. It's like a kind of mid-morning TV show set. And I'm going to try and pick out some of these questions. So we've had loads and loads of questions that you've all been giving us.
Yeah.
to answer. But I thought maybe just start off with just reflections on what you thought the Secretary of State's speech said. Any kind of initial views that you might have had? Marvin, start with you.
Yeah. We've been clear in the way we lead the city that we work with anyone because our focus is on getting things done. And as I've pointed out to a lot of our members, actually, it's not going to be any good for me at the end of my time rolling out a piece of paper with all the headlines I've got saying how everything's crap. What we've got to show is houses, development, jobs, better health, and all that, so we've got to get things done. But I've got to say, I mean, I struggle with the whole concept of devolution as a local leader. I think we talk about it, but you're not investing in the lines of local governance. And by that, I don't just mean city government, local authority, I mean the institutions of local governance. So to announce a fund, which is great, but actually that is a financial relationship with London, not with us, right? So all your reporting, you know, the proof of your worthiness to get the money is with people in London making the assessments. When actually, ideally, what you'd want is a group of people from local government, voluntary sector, health, criminal justice, business, sitting together saying, how do we want to run our place? And then you can have a more honest conversation whereby, as a number of organizations have told me, basically, we run the funding in year one, right? That's the criteria. So although our world has changed, we'll still use the criteria from year one to prove that you were worthy of funding again. It stagnates development. And I'd say, too, there are two examples of where the devolution thing is a problem, and we need a rebalancing of sovereignty in this country. One is, in the 2 years in the lead up to Brexit, not once did the Brexit minister come to talk to the leaders of the 10 core cities about what we need from the Brexit negotiations, all right? Not once. Now, if you'd have come to me and said, what do you need from Brexit, I wouldn't just come in local government, Labour. I bring, and we did this actually, we produced a paper. I bring the health service, voluntary sector, all the political partners, business community. You'd get a city perspective on what we need from those negotiations. So one of the biggest political decisions at our time, in the time of devolution, we have not had any influence. The second is the way the budget is done, which is something that we're going to address. And sorry, I'll shut up now. We're a leader of a city of 500,000 people. We don't know what's going to be in the budget. So how can we plan, right? And we've got, which what you'll recognize, is what we think is a bid and beg relationship to Westminster. Please, we meet your criteria, and we'll beg, and we may succeed, we may not succeed. We need a different kind of relationship. It's not just about pots of money going out. It's about fundamentally shifting the balance of who sets the agenda and how we get the pots of money to enable us to plan over the long term rather than seeing if we do or do not meet a government criteria.
Any reflections?
Top that. Yeah, I think I would just echo some of that. Obviously, we love money. So it's great when money is available, and we will be bidding for it, as I'm sure will lots of people here. But I think the point that Marvin makes really well is actually that's us then throwing in our best hopes and wishes and dreams to Westminster and hoping that something comes of it. And it doesn't actually build on what we are doing locally in, local networks in our area and across the city. And I think, this government has talked quite a lot about localism, but what it actually means is, yes, this sort of atomization in a way, through academies, through these big national funds, rather than how can we genuinely empower and build governance and capacity at a level which people can actually comprehend. I can't have a meaningful relationship with Parliament. That's not something that, or even representing Lockleaze, that I can do. But I can in a city, and and there are personal connections and networks which I can be part of, and information can be shared, and we can gather around each other and support one another. So I think that's, I would just echo that. Really well made.
Yeah, I think I would just echo both those points, really. Yeah.
Okay, great. So some challenges there. So, I mean, the funding issue then that came up. So there's a question about funders in this. If there's one thing funders could do differently to support local communities, what would it be? So it'd be good to get your reflections on that, if you have any.
I mean, that's a question for the room, right? Because that's, you know, it's not just us. I think what's really difficult is that we want to have a good relationship with funders, but we also don't want to disclose anything to them that might put off them giving us some money. So what's been really helpful with Quartet, which is our local community foundation, is that they employed somebody who annoyingly now has been scooped up by Homes England, but who ran a partnership called Vivid Generation that some of you might know. And she was employed to work directly with those communities, like us, work directly with Amy and us, to tell us this is the kind of thing that Quartet would support, and this is how you might bring a bid together. And that was really helpful, because rather than having this great list of criteria and saying, you know, squeeze yourself into this box or that box, they brought some capacity of someone who would come and sit alongside us, listen to what we're doing, talk about our strengths, talk about the areas we were struggling in, and then say, okay, I think there's a shape of an application or funding around X, Y, and Z, and supported us to put that in. So that was amazingly helpful.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. I think that it would be really helpful for funders to be able to come a little bit more and just see where people are actually at and how to help you get to the next stage, rather than always comparing you with other places or organisations that are doing these amazing things, because if we try to just get there, then we're just going to get disillusioned and down. And I think, yeah, to be able to have those really honest conversations about what will help communities and organisations move on, whether that's directly for between a funder and an organisation, or whether it's with a go-between like we've had with the Community House Foundation, is really, really helpful.
And I think a lot of what we see is often the power dynamic between funders and grantees as well, where you are having to jump through hoops and say what you need to say to get funding. I mean, of course, one of the big things that goes through our network and our movement is this sense of independence through developing your own income sources, using enterprise, using asset development. And a question on assets, which I thought, Marvin, you might just want to kind of add into this in terms of the funding dynamic. Taking over assets is the starting point. How do we ensure community-owned enterprises receive the support they need to thrive and be sustainable? So how do we, as we were talking about before, build up this sense of community ownership? What can, for example, local government do, Marvin?
Well, there is, I just want to, sorry, can I just pick that point of honesty? So I had to step down when I got elected, the trustee of a charity, and what they talked about was, because the criteria was up way away from them, they never got the chance to be fully honest. And the criteria, stuffed them into boxes that were questions that were 3 years old, you know, rather than wrapping themselves around what they said needed to happen. So how can we work? I mean, one is, as I was talking to a group just yesterday, I think part of that's just about having the honest conversation. I don't expect, there are different, see, if I think about Bristol, there are different communities that have a different track record as levels of experience of taking on assets. You know, we don't think that every group will be in the right position at the same time to be able to take assets. I mean, interestingly, I think some of those communities that have been the most left behind, probably out of necessity, have some of the strongest track records of community organising and and making things happen. And it's actually just reflections on last night. It perhaps is some of those middle communities that have kind of got by and been okay, that have no tradition of community organising, that are least able to organise right now. But I think partly one of the things I want to do is think about what is the nature, does it mean to be a local councillor as well? So I have a lot of councillors who define their role as asking me questions and holding me to account. And that's good, but in your leaflets, you don't say, I'm going to be the best questioner in the city. You see, I'm a person of agency. I can make things happen. I can organise. I can get people in a room. I can work with you to find other sources of finance. I'm not going to spend all my time talking about their local authority. I will talk about health services, interaction with business, with outside. And I think there's partly amongst in terms of the political leadership around what it means to be a political leadership that make things happen rather than just just kind of look for that negative association about a point or a point of complaint. I'd also say, I mean, we have. And people like Paul and Mohammed and Ed Roby, RTC sitting there. We have some fantastic people with the track record and people like yourselves who could potentially, we could begin to support to go to other parts of the city to share that expertise and share those stories about how it can be done.
So there's another question actually building on that sharing and learning point, which is what would your advice be, Marvin, in particular to other places where they say it's always been like this, nothing ever changes, and there's just this sense of not being able to kind of go in a different direction? How would you advise areas like that?
Well, I have two kinds. So I come from an area like that. You know, I grew up in Lawrence Western, then to Eastern, and you know, I got. For those of you who don't know, I've got quite a large family, 7 brothers and sisters. There might be more. You know, I've got all that background, right? I shouldn't be elected today by all the data. So I've got two responses to that. One is, I think that's pretty accurate analysis, right? The more things change, the more things stay the same. Inequality is compounded. Politics doesn't work for people. It doesn't bend to that. It bends towards the wealthy. You know, all that stuff is true. But my other bit is a challenge, you know? If you're waiting for a perfect invite to come from a perfect political system, you know, it ain't coming. So the decision you've got to make is, in the face of a political system that has a history of not responding, is what you're going to do. You're going to submit to that, or are you actually going to begin to look at those tools of community organizing and try to make something happen? And my constant challenge is, if you fail, and if your voice is never heard, never let it be said that you didn't try or that you chose to be silent. So again, we have fantastic people in the city with a track record of working with some of those marginalized communities, the voiceless communities where nothing's ever happened, and actually finding life and finding those people who are assets and dynamos and make things happen.
Yeah, I guess I would just say a couple of things about that. One is go to Norwest Media Centre today or tomorrow, and they will show you how they have used, in particular, the arts to engage people in a conversation, and often through creative expression, we can actually inspire and engage people much better than calling them to a meeting. So that would be my kind of number one tip. And I guess the other one is, both in Lockleaze and in a neighbouring ward in Hallfield, there were a couple of groups and forums where there just was a little power grouping of people who'd been there and done that for 20 years, and that was their dominant narrative, was nothing ever happened here and it's all terrible and it's, you know, disastrous. And you just have to take the conversation away from those groups. They can keep meeting and they can keep having that conversation, and you know, maybe they will be inspired and change, but maybe they won't. And you just need to say, actually, we're going to have like family karaoke night when we also talk to people, or Lockleaze Got Talent, or any of those other things that is fun and is a different place to have that conversation. And from relationship and connection, then you can build on that to say, actually, also, will you fill in the survey? Or what do you think about housing? Or might you want to come and help out at our lunch club? Or what do you want to see happen in your area? That's great, we'll help you. So sometimes it's actually you need to just get away from those people and have the conversation somewhere else.
And I think the point I'd add is that in those places where people say nothing ever happens, actually, when you look under the surface, there's actually a huge amount of strength, and there's a huge amount of community, and there's a huge amount happening. We've been going outdoor looking on some streets locally where there's a lot of tension and issues, and actually you go out and you speak to people and you find actually in some of those places the community is really, really strong. And I think that's the starting point for me, is actually trying to bring to the surface what's happening, rather than this expectation that there should always be something better that people should be doing. And once you bring that to the surface, people do start to naturally think about the next thing they want to do.
Yeah.
Great. So another question. So for those of you who are looking at the questions, I'm kind of skipping a couple focused on James Brokenshire, obviously, which are higher up there. If he's so excited to be here then and inspired by us, then why is he disappearing before Q&A is the top one for him, which we'll ask. Good point. The other top one, though, is that this concept of the relative difficulty in kind of more deprived areas versus less deprived areas. So is there an organisational poverty trap? Is it harder to grow and financially sustain organisations in more deprived areas than in more affluent areas?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a big issue for our organisation. We've got about 50% trading at the moment, and we're exploring all ideas of getting that up, and there's all little ways you can do. But, you know, they all involve extracting more money out of people that can't really afford it for the things that we do. And it's definitely a real challenge. And I'm struggling to see a point at which we can be completely independent of any subsidy. But I think the important thing is to think about how those kind of that support can come based on what we actually do. So, you know, how many community transport journeys we deliver, for example, rather than just kind of paying for people's salaries. And there's also a kind of ethical issue, isn't there, of like extracting money out of people who really can't afford it to pay for like my salary. You know, there's just all sorts of there's all sorts of issues there, and I think it hasn't been properly debated, the expectation about kind of how businesses will thrive in very different communities in our cities.
Marvin?
So there's something that makes me think about a conversation I had just after being elected we could look at for that. So if we were to be very intentional about saying, what do we want our community sector to be like for the whole city, not just for particular areas, in 15 years, those questions that we started with, and again, just to promote Vosca, it's in their magazine, what do we want the geographical spread to be? How's it going to reflect the full diversity? What areas do we want it to be working? If we're thinking 5, 10, 15 years, and then we think about, well, how do we get there in terms of the way that we commission, the way we make grants, then actually those kind of challenges could be taken on as a city challenge. Because actually what you do in Lockleaze and what happens in Hartcliffe is not just seen as something that happens up there, but it's seen as the part of the way that we want the city to look like and function like. And maybe it's something we could pick up through the city fund as well, as we've tried to think about how do we enable corporate social responsibility spend in the city to be used much more strategically rather than let's go and pay for a painting of a fence. So we could explore that as a city and maybe work with Vosca to do that. Actually.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I think as well, we did a local economic study supported by the New Economics Foundation, and they talked about, you know, okay, there might not be massive spending power, but where is it going? And it's going on housing, energy, and food. So we need to look at how we can own some of the housing and energy, and for that invest back into those communities so that community spend is recycled locally. And you know, we've started that journey with housing, and lots of other areas are on that journey with energy, and also with food, local food growing and production. And I think we have to start with what we've got, and in addition to, you know, whether we're spending a lot or a little, the thing we have in bags and bags is social capital. People, particularly if they don't have a lot of money, actually have a lot of support. They do look after each other's kids. They do, you know, our planning group, which just meets too late this Thursday, has a couple of kids that come along because that's the only way the single mum can come and be engaged. And it's really amazing. And I think we have some incredible engagement. So yeah, there's not loads of money washing around, but we've got a lot of good stuff.
Great. I think, and that kind of question, there is a really rich base of evidence in this room as well. So do network around and talk to people about how you can use enterprise and how you can support local communities, because if there's anybody that knows, they're in this room. So final question then, just for this session. So it's quite an interesting one. How do we ensure ideologically that volunteerism just doesn't fill the gaps in public service delivery? And so how do we straddle that balance between giving communities more control over what happens locally in a true partnership with local authorities and the other bits of the public sector versus you're on your own, here are the keys, get on with it if you want to? Marvin, do you want to start that one?
Go on.
That's going to be a real challenge because we can end up using the same words but meaning drastically different things. In fact, when I worked in DC just at the end of the 1990s, there was the whole drive around faith-based organizations going on. And on the face of it, it sounded great, right? Faith groups should be doing social justice, engaging in the communities. But what a number of the faith leaders were pointing out was, don't ask us on a £5 million budget to do something that you just cut $1 billion from, right? And so it's a tightrope. And it comes down to your judgment about whether the words that are coming out the mouths of leaders of a place actually are about genuine community organising, place organising, and movement to power, or whether it is, I'm stepping back because I believe in a small state and you're on your own. So I don't know how you come up with a mathematical formula for that. All I can say is here in this city, our sense is how do you end up with genuinely empowered communities? And I think one of the tests, and it's a test of the left, of politics of the left actually, and I've often said is, surely it is not our vision to end up with a relationship with communities that when public sector disappears, the community collapses, right? That's not what we're about. We want people to be empowered in relation to the state, in relation to communities as well, not dependent on public services. So we're trying to work out how you do that. We don't have all the answers. We just have this idea, and with the expertise of people in the room that work with us, crafting that into our future city plan is one of the challenges we want to take on.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think it's really difficult, and I think when universal credit was rolled out in Bristol this year, and part of DWP's kind of mitigation was people can go to food banks, we were pretty disgusted by that actually, that was a government response to people not having enough food. And the local statistics for my area have just come out, and it was 1,700 parcels have gone out in the last quarter, and 700 of those to children. So I don't think that what we're doing is about, I hope that our society, our government isn't just saying, oh, it doesn't matter because those nice people in community will pick it up. And if they don't, then children are starving. I think that's pretty outrageous. And there's a difference between crisis and helping people in crisis and supporting them to live strong and resilient lives. And we're about strong, resilient lives in which you have control and ownership, not about just plugging those gaps because the state is withdrawing. And I think we need to be really careful about that. We've all drunk the asset-based community development Kool-Aid, but that doesn't mean that we need to then take on everything that's broken because it's good, because ultimately that just means we impoverish ourselves, and then we can't exist anymore because we're trying to do too much because it's that differential.
I think Suzanne's just put it brilliantly. I think that's what I was going to say. It's just, it's about exactly that, about not pushing people so hard that actually they start to crumble. And that's
Excellent points, and good way to end it. Thank you so much to our amazing panel and our amazing speakers. Stay there a minute. Really appreciate you speaking, standing up here, giving us your thoughts and taking part in that Q&A as well. Thank you also to you for giving us your questions. So as promised, we will feed those through via civil servants to James Brokenshire and get his views on some of them as well. So there's still a chance if you would like to feed in more questions onto that website, we can collect them all. So just a couple of bits of housekeeping now as we close this session. I hope you've enjoyed the first opening plenary. Good. So we're in a minute, we're going to start moving on to the first workshops. So getting really stuck into some of the learning, but a few bits to highlight to you about the day. So the most important thing that you need to remember is that your lunch times are staggered. So you will have your lunch time on the back of your cards. Check the back of your cards because it has all the information that you need. So it will tell you when your lunch is, and it may be a different time to the people next to you. That's just in order to smooth out the flow of people and make sure that we have an efficient event. So remember all of the things you need to know is on there. I do encourage you, thinking about this evening, we have a second plenary session later this afternoon, which is all about our Keep It Local work, which is fantastic. We've got some really good speakers at that session. And then after that, we will have a networking break for you to talk to people as we get ready for the awards ceremony. So I cannot stress enough how important and exciting the awards ceremony is going to be. There is going to be food available, enough for you to eat for your dinner, and drinks available as well. So there's no need to leave the hotel, stay around, visit people, etc. And the workshops start in 5 minutes, so check where you're going, ask a member of staff if you need help, and see you later. Here with us. It's the first time we've had the Secretary of State since Locality was formed, as I said, in 2011. And we know that James is really committed to the community's agenda. So we're really excited to hear what he has to say about his plans and his ideas and his vision for the next few years. So without further ado, James. Thanks.
Thank you, Tony, for those kind words of introduction. And yeah, it is quite striking that I'm the first Secretary of State to have attended this conference. And all I can say is that my predecessors didn't know what they were missing. So I think this agenda is just so important. And you and your organizations represent some of the most exciting work going on in our communities. And I am genuinely delighted to be here today to thank you for everything you're doing and to be inspired by the examples that you are setting. Because as this year's theme, the power of community, acknowledges, you know better than anyone why strong communities, well-integrated, socially and economically robust communities just matter so much. In good times and bad, our communities are the glue that binds us all together. And we saw this most powerfully in the aftermath of the tragedy at Grenfell Tower and the terror attacks in Manchester and London. And who can forget the glorious celebrations around the London 2012 Olympic and Paralympic Games and the Queen's Jubilees. In this week alone, we're marking the centenary of the armistice, and today, Diwali with its hopeful message about the victory of light over darkness, underlining the rich diversity and the immense contributions from all communities that makes our country what it is. But it's not just the big milestones that count. It's the infinite daily interactions, the endless web of interdependencies, the collective memory of shared history and values that ultimately make a place more than a group of people living side by side and make it a community. That, and a real sense of pride and belonging. Despite the daily pressures we all face, that pride continues to shine through. We see, for example, that 82% of those who responded to the Community Life Survey agreed that people from different backgrounds get on well in their area. And 59% said that people in their neighbourhood pull together to improve it. The benefits for communities that boast this pride and solidarity are clear. The higher the levels of integration, the higher our sense of well-being, and the less likely we are to suffer from anxiety and health problems. If our children grow up in neighbourhoods where they have access to inclusive spaces like parks and activities such as arts and sport, they're less likely to turn to crime. The wider our social network, the greater our prosperity as we share information more readily about job prospects. But in truth, that's not how often it feels on the ground. We live in a world that can feel increasingly divided and polarized, leaving us feeling that the world around us is changing, but that we have little control over the things that are changing and over our lives. making it harder to hold on to what unites us rather than divides us. Now, as I said earlier, we're all stronger for our diversity as a country, and all parts of our community should be able to take advantage of everything that modern Britain offers, to realise their potential and play a full and active part in our society. And this, in many ways, is the defining challenge of the age for all modern, mature democracies. How to harness change and the opportunities that flow from it for the benefit of all and ensure that no one is left behind. Now, there are no easy answers to this conundrum, and many communities are, unsurprisingly, feeling the strain. Hate crime is at worrying levels here, and as we saw all too tragically in Pittsburgh, abroad, as are issues around loneliness and social isolation, affecting young and old alike. Our high streets too, the hubs of our communities, are under severe pressure. And there's a pressing need for more decent, affordable homes, but also worries about the impact of new development. So there are some huge challenges facing our communities, challenges that I know many of you are meeting head on, drawing on your invaluable local knowledge, networks, and the latest technology, and in the process, empowering people as never before. And I want to pay tribute to your incredible efforts and the very real impact that you are having in your communities. Now, here in Bristol, for example, we see how Knowle West Media Centre is harnessing digital technologies and the arts for the benefit of the community by supporting people to draw on them when developing their own enterprises and tackle the community issues that they care about. There's also the very commendable work of community-led groups like the Community Security Trust, Telmama and Gallup, who are standing up to hatred and bigotry wherever it exists and supporting victims. And I'm proud to stand with them. Faith communities such as the Al-Qawi Islamic Centre in London, which threw open its doors during the Jewish festival of Sukkot and built a sukkah, are making a real difference. As is local government, which has a vital role to play in strengthening communities in its own right, and also while working in partnership with community groups and the voluntary sector. Now, I saw this for myself, what this means when I recently visited Cornwall, where a lot of my own family came from, which has fully embraced the devolution agenda and is working with parish and town councils and a range of community groups to devolve assets, services, and influence. One such example was a much-loved running track in Parr, which, coincidentally, I'd used in my own youth a few years ago now, that had been taken over by a community group when it faced closure. It was wonderful to see it in such good hands, and the group's high ambitions for its future, which included a skate park, cafe, and a new children's area. And we can see that other authorities, like Durham and Wiltshire, are also stepping up to deliver this kind of onward devolution in service delivery, which puts local communities in the driving seat to decide their own priorities and find local solutions that suit local circumstances, and which helps them take control and ownership of the spaces and assets that will help their neighbourhoods flourish. Something that my department is championing in partnership with Locality through a Community Enabler Fund, one of a number of projects on which I'm pleased to see that we are collaborating. This shift in power from the state to the citizen is, in my book, true localism, a much-needed renewal of our democracy in action. And I want to see a lot more of it. Cornwall, Wiltshire, and Durham all became unitaries nearly a decade ago, and they have shown that local reorganisation should not lead to services being sucked up to a more distant central authority on high. Quite the reverse. They've been able to drive services and decisions down to communities on the ground. and the benefits speak for themselves. Tailored, more effective services, stronger local economies, and more engaged, more confident communities. Communities in which the conversation is happening, not official to official, but between local leaders and the people they serve. It's essential that we do much more to celebrate and learn from their example and from the communities who are leading the way. And that's exactly what we'll be doing through the fantastic Communities Roadshow being launched today. Because it's clear that we all need to play our part. Councils, faith leaders, community groups, businesses, the voluntary sector. And yes, government, in doing what we can to support you and to create the conditions where local communities are truly free to determine their own destinies and removing the barriers that stand in your way. Now, to that end, I'm working with colleagues across government on projects such as the integrated communities, civil society, and loneliness strategies, as well as the hate crime action plan. I've also launched the Building Better, Building Beautiful Commission to reinforce the central role of communities in shaping our built environment. Because decisions about the way we use space, about the quality of design and style of our buildings are inextricably linked to our sense of identity and sense of pride in the places we call home. This is what creates strong neighbourhoods, and all our spaces and places should embody this aspiration for, yes, beauty, and buildings that are in keeping with their surroundings and that are built to last. In addition, I recently agreed an ambitious mission statement for my department that demonstrates why communities are at the heart of everything we do as a department, be it our quest to build more homes, support quality public services, or drive local growth. This statement is centred on 4 themes. Firstly, we're giving communities more control over the decisions that matter to them. And nowhere is this more evident than on housing. We're giving local people a bigger say over the future of their communities through, for example, neighbourhood plans. Residents all over the country, including here in Bristol, are seizing the powerful opportunity they offer to decide where new homes, green spaces, and other facilities should go, and how they should look and feel. And I'm delighted that we're backing them with more money, an extra £8.5 million announced at budget, which takes our current investment in neighbourhood planning to £34.5 billion. Then there's the £163 million of funding we're making available for community housing. Housing for the community delivered by the community to meet local need. Giving communities more control also means giving them a role in policy development through initiatives such as the Community Partnership Board that I'll be attending for the first time later this month. Secondly, we're giving communities a sense of safety and pride by ensuring that they're economically and socially resilient in changing times. Businesses have a major role to play in this endeavour. And so I'm pleased to announce that my department will be working more closely with business in the community to provide practical support to businesses on volunteering opportunities for their employees and to promote better integration between people from different backgrounds. Business in the community has an impressive track record in this area, and I look forward to seeing what more we can achieve together. We're also working closely with businesses to revive our high streets, which in so many ways represent the heart of our communities. We know how much people value them and how worried they are to see them struggling as technology changes the way we shop and do business and live our lives. That's why the £1.5 billion package of support unveiled in the budget for high streets is so welcome. This spans not just vital short-term relief for small retailers that will bring their business rates down by a third, but also a long-term vision for our high streets that goes with the grain of changing lives and flexes with technology to pave the way for the smart cities and tech towns of tomorrow. A vision that will be underpinned by a £675 million Future High Streets Fund, which will help councils innovate and improve their town centres, and a relaxation of planning rules that will see more people living on our high streets and more mixed-use businesses. There are currently over 27,000 premises lying vacant in England's town centres. If we turned a fraction of these into homes, thousands more people could have a roof over their head. And research shows that higher numbers of residents on our high streets can generate higher footfall and, in turn, higher demand for shops and services. And there will be other imaginative, creative approaches that will differ from area to area that will help our high streets reinvent themselves and thrive again. And I'm looking forward to celebrating some of these trailblazers and the incredible people behind them at the upcoming Great British High Streets Awards. We need to pull out all the stops to support communities, to create many more of these vibrant, thriving hubs, hubs that make the most of our human interactions and experiences that they offer, and that no online competitor can hope to replicate. The action we're taking is an important step towards this, which brings me to the third theme, inclusive community spaces. These obviously include our high streets, as well as parks and other assets, and are crucial for many of the same reasons. Their ability to bring people from different backgrounds together in a meaningful way that breaks down mistrust, plus their ability to combat social isolation and give people a sense of belonging. As such, their value is beyond measure. And so I'm delighted to be launching a new project, Open Doors, that will see empty shops being opened up to community groups, offering services to younger and older people. The aim is to reduce loneliness whilst increasing footfall on our high streets and our town centres. We're calling today for landlords, public and private, to come forward and play their part in this exciting initiative and help truly transform their communities. We need to be bold and imaginative in tackling the challenges we face and ensure that, in line with the fourth and final theme, no communities are left behind. This is especially important as we leave the European Union and chart a new course to a bright new future. And I want to ensure that all parts of our country can seize the opportunities. It's with this in mind that our UK Shared Prosperity Fund will focus on tackling the inequalities between communities by driving up productivity, particularly in those areas whose economies are lagging furthest behind. I want communities across the country to have a voice in determining their economic destiny. This fund will give them that voice and help bridge the divides between the places that are prospering and those that are struggling. Now, this mission to build a more inclusive society also very much extends to people living in social housing. The terrible events at Grenfell shone a light on their experiences, which for too long had been overlooked by successive governments. And before I go on, I want to condemn publicly in the strongest terms the appalling video on social media showing an effigy of Grenfell Tower being burned on a bonfire. It beggars belief that anyone would do this, given everything that the bereaved and survivors have been through. We will always stand by them as a community, and also with other people living in social housing. And to that end, we recently published a social housing green paper informed by the views of around 8,000 residents from across the country, which focuses on the issues that matter most to them. Many spoke of their pride in their homes and communities, but also about the disgraceful stigma that they face and how we are determined to create a new contract on social housing to respond to this and so many other issues too. We're determined to stamp this out and are renewing and deepening our commitment to these communities to deliver a new generation of social housing. Because the only way we build a stronger, fairer Britain, the only way we can bridge the divides that hold us back and renew our democracy is by building stronger, fairer communities. Communities in which everyone has the opportunity, security, and dignity to build a better life. And that with a renewed focus on community, we can create a country that works for everyone and recognize that intrinsic connection between all of us as citizens, of family, of faith, of neighborliness, of community. That as we chart a positive new direction for our country through Brexit and beyond, we can create strong, confident communities socially and economically, which celebrate our rich diversity as a strength, which defines the country, the people that we are, and underlines so very firmly and very clearly that there is so much more that unites us than divides us. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. Excellent.